Hello again. A few days ago, I put out a video about my personal all-time Smite Dream Team Wombo Combo Super Smash Bros. Like, I don't know what I'm even saying. Basically, my dream team for Smite. And given that video was nearly 2 hours long, I thought it was going to absolutely bomb and that no one was even going to pay any attention to it. And so the amount of discussion around it, the amount of very passionate fans, that's what I'm going to say, for certain players and all of that stuff. It's been awesome, and I've loved seeing it. I did not expect it to get nearly as much response as it did, so thank you. And I figured there's been a lot of questions in the comments. Some people I missed, some people I didn't talk about enough, and some people who really should have got a mention and didn't. And some just general, little things that have been a bit misunderstood. So I wanted to take some time to come back and clear up a few questions that people had. Starting with the thumbnail, some people obviously just kind of took the video a bit at face value. I admit that thumbnail is a bit confusing. I didn't base the thumbnail on who I thought was in my dream team. That was just basically, Smite does not have many good pictures of players. It's really hard to find. So I found 5 of the best ones I could find. And someone said, for example, why did you do PBM like that? Not showing him the new Chad state. It's like, well, because, they've not had the nice, cool photos since then. So we're still stuck in season 6. So, yeah, the thumbnail's a bit confusing. It kind of looks like I had a team with 2 supports and no solo laner. I can see why that'd be a bit confusing. I thought people would read the description, but I should know by now that no one reads the description, no matter how helpful it is. So, yeah, that's something to learn in the future. Second point, I hope my camera stays in focus this time rather than focusing on this wardrobe behind me, which it loves to do, which is a real pain in the ass. So yeah, let's get into it, starting with people that I missed. First one to talk about is Emilito, who I somehow left out. 2 times world winning, 1 time MVP, ADC. He's on my list. I don't know how I missed him. Well, actually, I do know how, because I'll give you a bit of behind the scenes on my recording process. I left this in a comment before, so some of you might have read this. I left a few of these comments as comments on the video, but I figured it'd be better to just put it in one place. But basically, I tend to record a bunch of things at a time, so I don't get a lot of free time, and especially don't get a lot of time to sit down in front of a camera and talk. So I had just finished recording a video about NRG, which should hopefully be going out at some point soon. And basically I had waxed lyrical about how sick NRG were for like 2 hours. Actually, that video's not that long, but it was a long time. I've been writing, planning a script and writing about and thinking about how good NRG was and the things that made them great. And a lot of that was including Emilito and how much of a clutch player he was. So in my head, I'm like, oh, I've already spoken about Emma. I saw him on the list, must have just skipped right past him. Like, oh, I've spoken about Emma loads. So yeah, it wasn't like an omission by, oh, maybe he doesn't think he's good. No, it was real good. Real good. You don't get 2 world wins and an MVP by being a bit of an average player, do you? So, of course, he was supposed to be on the list. But, high production value down, struck again. What to say about Emma? Like I said, 2 times world winner, 1 time MVP. I mean, that tells a story in itself. Like, that kind of says it all. To not spoil too much about what I want to say about NRG in the future, I think the role that Emil played in that team was so important because, you had adapting and Yamin and Rafa doing their things and getting the team ahead and just usually winning most games. But that team didn't always win, like the kind of mid 3v3. That wasn't always a done deal. In kind of hindsight, looking back, you think, well, of course it was. It was, the GOAT jungle mid duo and stuff. But, not every game goes perfectly. And whenever those games went dodgily, whenever they started to fall behind or anything like that, they would look to Emil as their win condition. He would be there, like, fall back. Everything's gone wrong. We need you. And that was really, really important. Like, really important because he delivered. That's why he's known as such a clutch player in Smite, because when Epsilon had their backs against the wall, when it was really tough, when it looked like they weren't going to win, he would just pick these late game hyper carries and just pop off. Actually, saying that, what's funny is how he originally started on that team was when Epsilon were going through their phase of just farming everyone. He just picked an ETH every game. Would clear the wave really aggressively, sit at their tower, spam taunt, and just charge the ultimate over and over. So you can picture the person in comms going, Neath charging their ult, Neath stopped charging ult, Neath charging ult, Neath stopped charging ult, like over and over. And it was just like super BM, but when you're that good, you can get away with it. I think you first started to see how important he was to the team in their games against Cloud9, where it was the first time they'd really come up against a team they were struggling against, And, you know, his Freya in the games that they won was just like untouchable. Did so much damage. And yeah, of course, what more is there to say about his run in Season 3 Worlds? That Kronos play was insane, but he was just constantly performed for that team when they needed him most. He was such a wild card. He didn't play like a standard ADC. He played so rogue and so weirdly. And that was the side of energy I think people forget. They had that ability to change their game style. Like, oh, okay, we're losing? Right, well, let's change how we play. We're going to now split push into towers rather than team fighting, you know. And having an ADC that doesn't play by the rules, it's really good. He was such an important part of that team. The reason why he didn't make it into my sort of top team, my top players, is that if you look in terms of how careers have gone generally, and look at someone like, I think Barracuda is a very good example of this, where Barra sort of first rose to prominence before Emil. That cognitive team was around for a lot longer than Emil's sort of real blowout moment on the scene, where, you know, he joins Epsilon and goes wild. So you think about it in terms of Barra's been around a lot before then, and I would say that sort of from Season 4 onwards, Energy was still a good team, but they never quite hit that height. They were permanently on a decline from there. And then, you know, Season 5, still on the decline. Season 6, he's playing for that United team, very, very middling. Season 7, playing SEC. Season 8, he's come back. And I'm not going to judge him too hardly on this season, because playing an ADC on 200 ping or more is miserable. And, you know, there's only so much you can say about his play like that. But at the same time, you look at someone like Barracuda, who has kind of gone from strength to strength. You know, he's gone from that early period of winning world titles to when he suddenly flipped the switch and became the team's carry in like Season 3 and 4. And now he's back to being that kind of, you know, just almost like a role player. That's not an insult, by the way. That's not me saying, oh, you know, what's he doing? You know, he's just kind of there. That's not true at all. He's carrying games when he needs to, like on that Soul game, that, you know, that one where it was just like destroyed everyone. I even made a video about that, but the point is that he's got such a good team around him that anyway, the point I'm making is getting a bit lost in this. What I'm really trying to say is that he's still playing at a super duper high level, and he has been for, you know, 8 years straight. Whereas Emil has been up and down, and he had really high highs, but there's been a lot of lows in between that point. And, you know, I feel like it wouldn't surprise me to see him retire at the end of the season. Maybe, like, they said, I don't know whether it was jokingly, I assume so, but he said to Hazel that if they lost against the Scarabs when they were going through their roster changes, that he was going to quit right there and then. So I think it's one of those things where it's how people value certain things. For me personally, I think I really value longevity of a career, which is why a lot of people's choices of teams disagreed with mine, because they were like, well, you know, I pick Season 3 Emilito because he was insane as my, you know, as my ADC. And for me, it's like, yeah, Season 3 Emilito was really good, but, you know, Season 3 or 4 Barra was really good, and so was Season 1, and so was Season 8, and so was Season 6, you know. Like, actually, that's a bad example. Season 6 was not a good year, but you get the point. The point I'm trying to make is that I really value longevity, because it's difficult to get to the top. It's harder to stay there. So, that's why I didn't make it into my top 3, but definitely someone I should have mentioned. And the next person I definitely meant to mention was Scary D. And it's funny because I have actually been a big Scary D stan over the years. And I've spent my life fighting his corner against people who are like, oh, he's crap. Oh, he's, you know, super overrated. He's not that good. Got character world, blah, blah, blah. And so then I missed him out of this. And suddenly I got loads of people like, why didn't you include Scary D? I'm like, wait, what's going on? Well, I'm on the wrong side of this. Yeah, Scary D should definitely be mentioned here. Again, 2 times world winner. I think every 2 times world winner needs a mention in sort of some category or another. And now to talk about Scary, I think you need to focus on worlds runs. And I'll come back to this in a minute as my reason why he didn't get into my sort of top list of solos, because I'll get to it in a second. The point I'm trying to make is that, is there a better sort of high stakes solo laner throughout Smite's history than Scary D? Man, I mean, compared to his regular season play, fairly average. When it counts, when his back's against the wall, man, just evolved. He's just a different player. So going back to when he first joined that Luminosity team with Masked, Xenotronics, Barrett, and Jeff, there was real question marks over him, to the point where I can't believe this really happened, but D and Brandon released a video like, how are they picking Scary D over me? I should get this spot. And then Scary D won Worlds twice, got to a World semi-final, went to 5 games against NRG. Anyway, that's besides the point. The point I'm making is that even back when he was, a real question mark on the team, people really weren't sure whether they should be there. He then goes onto that Luminosity team and has such a good performance at that season 3 semi-final on Luminosity versus NRG. People remember his Matarasu escape around the map. Like, that was a legendary moment in itself, where he's scooting away at high speed. Glorious stuff. And I think what people also forget is that he got like Matarasu banned that set. And that doesn't sound too crazy these days, but she was not the god she is now back then. She had a lot of buffs, a lot of better items. So, yeah, she's not the same god that she is now. So to get her banned is really impressive. And that's when he was really young, really loose. Obviously, he had a kind of few problems in his play. He was very undisciplined, and that got punished a bit by NRG. But he popped off then, and that was a sign of things to come, because they fast forward a few years, dodgy few years on teams here and there. He was on that space station team with like Jigs and Andy and stuff like that. That team had potential, didn't really go anywhere, but they slowly formed together this team that would eventually become SK, and obviously eventually go on and win Worlds. And I think, what more is there to be said about his Achilles play in that Season 6 Worlds run, that Fine OK had a command in his chat, I'm pretty sure. Maybe I'm making this up, but I think this happened, where it was !Achilles, and it was just, why didn't we ban Achilles? Why didn't we ban it? He is so quietly the best player on the map a lot of the time, because he's so well positioned in these. I think he plays the late game team fights better than like anyone else. And I mean that, because that is what SK did. That is what PK did. They played these late game fights. They took it into these really high stake match, like where everyone's really juiced up, and they just beat you like that. And he seems to play that style better than just about anyone else. And like I say, he's quietly the best player, because sometimes you just suddenly see someone die and you're like, wait, what happened? Scary got a kill. And you're kind of looking for faults almost. You're like, how did that person die? And you're not really thinking, wow, what an insane play by Scary. And I don't think Rival noticed it in Season 6. I don't think Ghost noticed it in Season 7 with his Cthulhu. Like, they did notice it with his Guan. They banned Guan every game because they couldn't handle how much work his Guan was doing. He got through game 1, destroyed, and then was just banned the rest of the games. So, yeah, I think when it comes to these players who are known as these clutch players, these big game players, Scary D is just insane for it, because 2 world runs in a row, he was just the most underappreciated member for someone who played insanely well. Don't get me wrong, he got a lot of hype, especially this year. Remember that King Arthur play where he saves Fred's life, where he ults Cheerio in that game 5. That's one of the top 5 plays of all time, in my opinion. Like, you heard it in Aggro's voice. Like, Aggro nearly died. Like, he went so high pitched because it was so ridiculous. Yeah, he deserves props this year, and I'm glad he finally got them. I think he's been the victim of the fact that in both the runs he had teammates around him that just shone a bit brighter. In Season 6, both Sam and Neil just went absolutely insane, and so got their MVP awards. Well, Sam got the MVP award. People say Neil should have got the MVP award. And that was unfortunate for Scary. And then this year you had the Paul show, and I was going to say no one's going to win MVP past that. I mean, technically Neil did win MVP past that, but I think we know, because of the circumstances around it, the MVP really went to Paul. Let's be real. So yeah, you're never going to win MVP around that, but it's not like he was getting carried. It's not like he was just a middling member. He was a key member in every single fight, and probably the most consistent performer over those 2 Worlds wins. So, yeah, definitely should be mentioned. Poor Scary D. He deserves better. Keeping on solo laners, Nika. Nika is one who, it's funny, since I recorded it, when Only Warriors were doing nothing and languishing down at the bottom of the table. I mean, they still technically are kind of languishing at the bottom of the table, but since then, it has just become the Nika show. Nika's just shown that, hey, I'm really, really sick at this game. And yeah, I'm going to just kill everyone all the time. And he's insane. And I've been saying for years that he's been one of the best solo lanes in the league. especially since that Renegades team formed. He's just changed his game entirely. He went from a very middling solo laner back in the day. You know, on the Sanguine teams, he was just bang average, really. Nothing special at all. And then he gets on that Renegades team, that Space Station team, and he just becomes a win condition. He has that special quality where certain gods just shouldn't be allowed. Like, I know he's not playing Amaterasu particularly at the moment, but when Amma was good and he was playing it, it was just like, how does he keep getting this pick? How? Explain how he keeps getting this pick to me, because I don't get it. It won games over and over. So, yeah, it's one of those things where, again, my issue with putting him right at the top is longevity, because he's having these amazing seasons, don't get me wrong. The last 2.5 seasons, so season 6 to current day, have been insane, and that's really good. But someone like Benji was doing that in season 4, season 5, 6, 7, and 8 now. So that's why he didn't quite make it into the top ones, but he definitely should have got a mention, because he is absolutely, when he's on his day, he's probably the most game-changing solo in the league, I would say, at the moment, in terms of like just the impact plays that he makes. So, and especially at the moment on Oni Warriors, I don't think a single solo laner is pulling as much weight for their team as he is, other than maybe Solo or Troll. So yeah, definitely deserves a shout, and I do apologize, Nika. He's also now currently the king of the queue. You know, there was the Zapman queue back in the day. There's been a ton of different queues ever since, but now we're in the Nika queue. This is the era of the Nika queue, and that's a very powerful thing, you know. Back into the Hunterland, Reels in the ADC role. Obviously, he would just be one of my quick mentions at the beginning, because he didn't play particularly far into Smite. He stopped playing many years ago. But EU's deadly duo, him and Badger. Yeah, Reels was the premier ADC in Europe for a very long time, actually. He was by far and away the best, even not necessarily on the best teams. Wasn't really winning as much as he deserved, but he was comfortably the best. He got voted it quite a few times. Like, I think he got voted like EU's like MVP for a while. He was the most like naturally gifted hunter I've seen. Just really got the game. Super aggressive, just W keying constantly, destroying teams that were far above what you think they'd be capable of, that team. But they went from strength to strength, and he was a huge part of it. And he also had some of the best comms ever, including, I'm going through them like a knife through butter. I just self-censored myself, because shout out to YouTube. Yeah, he was like the he was like the European version of Zapman at that time, where it was like the rest of the ADCs trying to catch up to Zapman back in the day. That's what it was like for reals. He was that far ahead of the game. And he's one of those where I really wish he'd stuck it out, because there's just something about his style of play that has aged really well. These super aggressive ADCs are still having a really good time of it. Think about how Yarkor plays in the ADC. Well, played, he's now swapped, but he only just moved into that role, and his super aggressive play just really does wonders for his team. And you can't help but feel like someone like Reels would bring that sort of fury now. Still, obviously, that's total speculation. Talking 6 years since he like retired, but still, he was just levels ahead of the EU scene, even on teams that weren't right at the top. Comfortably one of the best ADCs. Had he stuck around for longer, may have been higher, but definitely deserves a mention. And here's one that was another one on my list that I just forgot to say. Callus, the boy himself, the Paradigm sub, turned 2 times World's finalist. I was going to say 2 times nearly World's winner. That just sounds so harsh. Yeah, Callus, I think if you could sum up Rival as a team, it was that they were greater than the sum of their parts, you know. They obviously had like real superstars on their team, but I think their theme was that together they were better than their names on the sheet, you know. Like Callus is one of those players who, when he went on to other teams, didn't look quite the same as he used to, but together on that team, he was probably the most underrated one. In a team of underrated players, he was, in my opinion, the most underrated. Maybe Vote, actually, because Vote was quietly one of the best ADCs in Europe for a very long time. People didn't really realize how good he was. And it was the same with Callus. I mean, how often did you see Athena banned against them? How many, like, I remember I can't remember what game it is. I just have this image clear in my mind of him hitting like a 3 or 4 man taunt in duo lane against, I think it was like against a North American team. It might have been against E United when they played them again after they lost their world finals to them. He was everywhere. And he made picks like Athena and Sylvanas look really, really, really good. And, you know, being a close friend of Deathwalker, that's obviously got to be nice for team communications or like team mental state. Yeah, it's kind of criminal that after 2 World Finals I didn't mention him. So here's my mention. Here's your mention, Callus. I know it means a lot to be mentioned in this random second channel video of a channel you don't even follow probably. Yeah, he was definitely the kind of behind the scenes, not behind the scenes, but like when you're watching Smite, you watch the big flashy plays. You watch the Wolfie hitting 2-man snipes. You watch Deathwalker 3v1ing, but you don't really pay attention to the Athena that just dashed in and got 3 sets of beads and 1 taunt, you know? And then suddenly, oh, look, Deathwalker's going in. He's killing all 3 of them because he can knock them all up and, you know, CC them all and slow them all. And you don't really notice that, hey, Athena just did all the hard work for him. And like, I think a really, really good example of that is the Ares solo, where obviously the Ares solo was the big attraction. That was the big appeal. But it was really the Athena that made it work, because it turns out it's real easy to hit chains when there's a big taunt hitting the Bellona in front of you. And you're losing lane pressure, just get an Athena ulting over, and suddenly the Bellona has to back off. And it's like, you know, suddenly Variety is having a really miserable time. So, yeah. On a team of underappreciated players, he might be the most underappreciated. So I feel bad that I've left him out, but he's definitely right up there with the runnings. And now onto some sort of ones I just want to quickly shout out as well. People mentioned in the comments, and I agree, want to give a quick shout out to Homie FA, for example, who was one of those, his time in the sun was quite short. I'm not sure what his reasoning was for kind of dropping out stuff, but when he was at his best and when he was jungling for, I think it was Saw, I can't remember the exact team name. The team names changed all the time back then, but yeah, that North American super team, he was, in my opinion, the best jungler in North America. The first North American jungler to really challenge adapting for a long time. His Ao Kwong was ridiculously good. His Thor was amazing as well. I think his biggest weakness from what you hear or that people say was that he was just not a LAN player. He got quite nervous at LAN. I don't know whether this is true. This is just bloody stuff through the grapevine. So I might just be totally slandering him here. And if so, I'd apologize, but that's what you hear. And I remember he was pretty young at the time he was playing, so it would make sense. But he was a really mature player, really, really good. People do not appreciate how good he was at the time. He was like, you know, top jungler in North America. North America was really competitive at the time, so I don't say that lightly. And it's really impressive to me that when Yamin dropped out of NRG unexpectedly and he stepped in as mid, having never played mid before, so that team got 3-0'd or 2-0'd, whatever it was. They didn't win a game, but he did not look out of his depth. Obviously, you're never going to look as good bringing in a sub who plays jungle into your mid lane, replacing potentially probably the greatest mid to ever touch the game. You know, you're not going to look amazing, but I was expecting to come out of those games thinking NRG never stood a chance because they had Homie FA and mid, and I didn't think that at all. They didn't look the same because they weren't the same team unit, but I think Homie FA stood his ground, and so to join a new team entirely, play very decently, nothing to be embarrassed of at all. So yeah, really good player. Shame he doesn't play anymore. Maybe one day we'll see him back. It seems like all the old pros are kind of circling back these days, so you never know. Pain de Vionde, he's one who maybe should have got a bit of mention. The General, as everyone knew him, famous for bringing together that enemy team in Season 2, who were a total dark horse. Everyone thought they were total doo-doo and weren't going to get anywhere, and they kept winning these fluky games, and everyone was like, yeah, here we go, you know, they're going to fluke their way to another game. And then they kept fluking it, and then they kept fluking it, and then everyone was like, wait a minute, maybe they're not fluking it after all, maybe they're just actually good. And it was like, only when they made it to the very finals of the Smite World Championships, people were like, oh, maybe they're actually good, you know? Maybe this team of players, like, it's funny, the names you see now, you've got, like, Vetium in ADC, who was a very, very, very decent player for a long time. Benji in solo, who was Salt Machine at the time. Chaos in the mid lane, who went on to play for that United team that were top of North America for a long time, like a really strong mid laner for a long time in North America. And you think, how could people think this team was bad? But they really did. And he was known as the one kind of leading them together, making them work. Obviously, they got 3-0'd by Epsilon in the finals, but, you know, who didn't at that time? Who didn't get 3-0'd by Epsilon? So... but to make it to a grand final was insane, and everyone's like, wow, this enemy team's amazing. Can't wait to see them play next season. Oh, wait, Payne's just kicked everyone but Chaos. He's just like, spring cleaning, tossed them all out, brought in a whole new team, and it was really controversial at the time, and it started a lot of discussion as to, you know, what constitutes the team? Because if it's just like the captain and one player left, that means that more of the team has left than was there. So is that even enemy anymore? Like, starts to become into like Ship of Theseus sort of discussions. It got real weird, but yeah, it was real big drama at the time to just boot an entire team that was just in the world finals. And so everyone thought this enemy team are going to suck and maybe just going to fluke their way some victories. And you might notice a theme here. It turned out they were another really good team. That team was actually, I would argue, better than the original enemy was. So yeah, it was a story of someone who could put teams together and make them work. And it shows the power of shot calling. And I think the alternative that you see, where you see really good players get put together in a team and suck, compared to really new and sometimes quite average players being put together by a good shot caller and winning, shows just how important calls are at the high level, because being mechanically good is good to win ranked games, but when it comes to organized pro level games, it's not even close. Like, you need to have good shot calling or you're just never going to make it. And that was Payne's speciality. He just ran those games, put teams together. And I mean, that second enemy team with like Panda Cat, Scream, Marauder, like, that was a good-ass team, so he knew how to pick them, that's for sure. Yeah, he definitely deserves a shout. I think he's another one who, from what you gather of other people who played with him, was a difficult teammate. And you can imagine someone who's that into shot calling and organising the team can be hard to work with when things aren't going his way. But he definitely deserves a shout because he had a really big impact on the scene back in the day. Yeah, and that style of being a general that puts together teams is one that I gave Irafa a lot of credit for. So to not give Payne credit for it is poor from me, so I apologize, Mr. Devionde, even though your name just means meatloaf, which is very, very weird. Who makes a name like that? But yeah, he put together some really good teams, got them to really high places, and that's very impressive. And finally, someone said, no mention of layers. So that I say, no. Like, my toilet isn't clean enough to start talking badly about layers. His grandma's going to start tweeting at me or something. So it turns out that even when making a video on things that I'd forgotten, I managed to forget even more things. So this is now like technically my 5th attempt at getting all the correct people. Welcome to a much more scuffed setup. This is just with my shitty little webcam. Just got out of bed, but I'm doing it for you, the content machine. The people that I wanted to shout out that I missed last time. Well, I'll start with the man himself, Apple Lobster, who someone on my Discord reminded me about mere seconds after I recorded the rest of the video that you just saw. So shout out to Valk. Basically, yeah, he was one that definitely should be in there because he was one of my favorite players for a very long time. Was Lobster, and for a good few years at the beginning of Smite was the one that I would say is probably like if I was doing my Smite dream team, then would have been my mid laner, because he was the GOAT back in the early days. Back in the days where every single mid lane matchup was Agni versus Poseidon, you had Lobster there. Lobster was the original Agni. He was like one of the first players in Smite to really get known for a god player combination. That was quite a rare thing at the time. It was more at the time. It was more basically everyone just played whatever was new and whatever was meta. But he just stuck to his Agni and was really, really good at it. And he played on that TSM team that got all the way through the launch tournament without dropping a single game, which is pretty insane if you consider how strong the other teams they were against were, like the Cognitive Prime that would go on to win Worlds next year, and old Team Dignitas with like Lassus and Zap and stuff like that. It were a very, very strong team, especially at that tournament. So shows his sign of class as a mid laner, and he was a bit of a sort of benchmark of talent for a long time in Europe, especially sort of through the first 3 seasons particularly, where on every good team you would find Lobster in mid lane pretty much. You always seem to, it was always that core of him, Cuvo, Tricks and stuff like that. And he was just consistently at the top of his level. I mean, if you remember anything about that team though, it's that no one peels for Lobster. Poor Lobster, man. You had Trixank, who is not interested in peeling at all. You had whatever solo lane they had, which apparently also didn't give a shit about appealing for him either. So he basically just kind of sat in the back line, getting dove by frontliners and dying on cooldown. That was just the life of Lobster back then. So yeah, he was definitely one of those that if you were doing this Dream Team video about 2015, he gets straight in your team pretty much. Really, really class player. Again, was one of those whose career kind of just tailed off, never really quite reached the same heights. But I don't think that's necessarily his fault. I mean, that team faltered and got a bit kind of I don't really say confused, but they never quite reached their heights. They choked at LAN super hard, and that core of players only really. Also, I've just realised I'm squeezing this like washing up thing, and it makes like a fart noise when I do it. So if you hear any toots in the background, I promise that's not me. I'm putting it down. So now if you hear any toots, it actually is me. Um, yeah, that team never quite made it back to any peak, and it was only when they became Team Dignitas and picked up some additional players, additional like variety and stuff like that they really started to see success. And that's kind of, if you imagine that core success and Lobster's trajectory, they did cross over, and Lobster never quite reached those peaks. But really, really good player, pretty wide god pool for the time. Yeah, just super consistent. The Norwegian GOAT, as some might say. Next one to talk about is Zeros in the mid lane as well. He is a player who has been, I say in the mid lane, he's been just about everywhere. He hasn't played ADC or support, but other than that, he's been all over the gap. He started out as a jungler for, I think it was Fnatic. He was definitely on Fnatic. I don't know if that's where he started, but he was on that kind of Captain Twig in mid, Reels, Maniac, Badger, that kind of team. And yeah, very, very competent jungler. Did very well, especially in that first World Championship. They managed to beat Cog Red it was admittedly a best of one, and he got Ao Kwang, who was one of the most busted releases ever. So, I'm not trying to shoot at any achievement. Still really impressive to beat the #1 seed, the favorite coming into it. But he did have Ao Kwang. And then he went to mid for a bit, and then went to solo on a team that this is why I know some people don't like the new team names, but you got to remember how bad they were back in the day. He was solo for Cringe Crew with Millsy was on that team with a bunch of others like Shaggy Shank, and yeah, it was again a very decent solo laner. Not exactly setting the world alight. Where he really got his big break was when I say big break. He was already a sort of a pretty well established name in the scene, but when he really took off, when he started playing mid for Team Dignitas, and he was incredible, absolutely incredible. He was one that I wasn't really sure when I saw that team get put together. I thought we've seen him in mid before. Maybe he's a solo, maybe he's a jungler. I don't really know. Blah blah blah. All doubts just absolutely wiped out. Such a good mid laner, super clean. He made Thoth look like the best god in the game. He was one of those. I feel like Thoth is one of those where if you're good enough at him, he looks like an entirely different god, and he just constantly put out so much damage. It was one of those where you'd find yourself looking at the player damage charts about, anywhere past halfway into the game, and he would be a solid 10k above anyone else. And that's such an impressive thing to do, because a lot of people feed on that god. And it wasn't just that. He played a lot of Sol. He played a ton of different gods. And that Team Dignitas team, again, I say a lot about this Team Dignitas team. Their LAN performances never quite showed how good they can be, because they were real good. They were the strongest European team in a really strong European league. So to be like outshining Yaman and Wolfie at the time, that is no mean feat. And I just wish that they had the LAN success to back it up, to show how good that team was, because Zeros was on the top of his game. Him and Fred together was so dangerous. And whereas Lobster before didn't get the peel, he did get a lot of peel. And you can see the difference it made for that team, because it's like, hey, wait a minute, it's almost quite good if our mid laner survives and does loads of damage. Who knew? So he definitely deserves a shout out. Very good player. And he's, when you think about it in terms of how long he's been around, people think of the players like, the Q for Freds, the Twigs, the Barras and Zaps who've been around forever. I don't think people give him Zeros enough credit for how long he's been around. I know he was like SEC last year, but he was still playing. And then you think about the fact that he's still playing now. Admittedly, not been the best season for any of the Valks, but again, the ping issues, I'm not gonna harp on those again. He started to take off a bit in the last few weeks. We've actually, as Hazel would say, we've finally seen him not playing Neath and like not just randomly rotating nowhere. And he's doing well, so that's good to see. And I'm just excited to actually see them play like normal human beings on LAN at some point, someday. Who knows when? Maybe it'll happen this year. Who can say? But that'd be fun to see back. And finally, and I really hope this is finally, because if I manage to forget another person after all of this, then I don't know what to do with myself. I'm officially just absolute waste, man. Last one is Fumbler. Fumbler. Actually, I'm really surprised I forgot Fumble because he was one of my favorite players forever. I remember seeing him back on Team Coast, I think it was, back in sort of launch tournament days, and I talked about how Lobster was one of the first ones to really have an iconic God God player combo, and for Fumble it was on her. You just didn't let him have on her. He was ridiculous at it, and that's a bit of a theme throughout all of his years playing, was that he was a mechanical beast. And I think it's such a shame for Fumble because it took so long for him to really get on a team that showed just how good he was. Like, he was an absolute beast for a long old time, but was on a bunch of doo-doo teams. Like, was he on that SK team? I have a feeling he was on that SK team, you know, the European one that has, I think it has the record for the longest loss streak in all of the SBL. So that's no fun. That's no good at all. So I think that has somewhat tarnished his career. But you finally saw, once you got him onto that Renegade team in season 6, like, this guy is the real deal. Absolutely took off. That team blew up. Absolutely blew up when they eventually got their visas sorted out. They just went absolutely ape shit. It was insane to watch. And personally, I loved it because it felt so deserved. It felt like someone has really put the hard graft in and should have been on a much better team by that point already. So finally got his shot, and he took it with both hands. I mean, I don't know what happened with that team in terms of, I know he was let go at the end of the season. I think there was just sort of internal differences, but in terms of his play, he was an absolute nutcase. He really was. He just, on that team, was a surprise to a lot of people, myself included, but just how good. I thought they were going to be good. I thought they were going to be scrappy and like kind of, you know, get random. They struck me as a team that would be, you know, they'd beat the best and lose to the worst, be really inconsistent. But they were the opposite. They went through the whole of MSI and dominated. They were an absolute beastly team and could have won Worlds that year. And Fumble was a huge part of that. And he had amazing crit luck as well. There's that one clip of him playing Jing Wei where he has something like 10% crit chance against like 3 crits in a row. That's pretty OP. That's a good skill to have as a player. So yeah, he was a really aggressive player, super aggressive, always wanting to fight, always wanting to like just scrap. And you got to respect that play style. No pussyfooting around here. This is we're all about fragging here. So he definitely deserves a shout out. Like I said, his career never really took off, and right when it did start to take off, then it ended when he left that Renegades team. He didn't play again, which is a real shame because it finally felt like he's made it. But I guess, you know, getting reverse swept is a bit of a killer for the mental. So it's a shame because he was, in terms of mechanics, one of the best ADCs we've ever seen. Absolute nut job when he was on his day, when he really took off and controlled a game. One of the best to do it. Very much like a European Zapman style of play. The super hyper aggressive, I'm going to be better than you, and like rather than a Barracuda who's just going to team fight better than you, he was the kind of, no, I'm better than you, and I'm going to show it. So hopefully that's everyone. I really do hope. I'm sorry this is so scuffed. I've literally just got out of bed, still nursing my morning cup of tea, in my hoarder's room with my important relics in the corner. So I really, really hope this is the last one. If I have to do another one of these, I'm going to lose my tiny mind. So I don't know if Dan did an outro. I don't know if old Dan did an outro. I really hope he did, because I'm just going to throw it back to him. So if not, the video is going to end very abruptly. But otherwise, back to old Dan. Anyway, last final question, serious question, was someone said, who would be coach for this team? And that's a question that I don't have the answer to, because I don't think we as players know enough about what each coach does for a team to, I think I said we as players, we as watchers know enough about what a coach does for a team to really make any decisions on it, because some coaches are very much there for their ability to help with sort of, I mean, every coach wants to help with drafts, picks and bans, all of this kind of stuff, you know, research on the other team, making sure you know what you're getting into. But then from there, it kind of stems. You have some who are really like, okay, I think this build is really strong. I think you play best this way. You might have coaches like Cherio has been this year for Scary D, where he's, you know, you got a new player in the jungle. Let me show you how to do stuff. You know, let me show you around the map. And then you got some who are much more involved in sort of player management, and because it's tough running a team. Egos clash, like personalities clash. people want to play different styles, things aren't working out. It's not all roses. And sometimes you need an external person who's not there in the front lines to basically be like, oi, stop being prats, get your shit together, slap them up, keep them in line. And you have some where, you know, sometimes teams just kind of work together already, and they coach wise, they really push the meta and maybe try and work something else out. So you have these kind of different styles, and I think for each team it's different, and it depends sort of week by week, you know. For example, you imagine the coach of PK, who was Rowe at the time, for this is season 6 PK, the European super team, started out trying to be the guy sorting out builds and picks, and then very quickly realize, there's a lot of egos on this team. There's a lot of contrasting ideas. So I think we don't know nearly enough about coaches to decide that stuff, which is a shame because they do a lot of hard work. So, but you have the coaches who've been around forever, the biggies, Chuckles, Rowe, Bomb, stuff like that. They're Slaney. There are so many coaches who've been around for a long ass time and keep getting picked up by teams. So they must be doing something good. So I think my final answer is me. I'm the coach because I'm sick and my brain is enormous. No, I'd be a dreadful coach. The amount of times where I'm on stream and I'm like, I hate this comp. This comp sucks, and they win. It's to the point where if I say I hate a comp, it's almost guaranteed to win. So yeah, wouldn't trust me. Anyway, I hope that clears some things up, and